Yo, 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 what is it? You already know what it is. This is your boy Levon. I'm just coming back on one more again, man, after a long hiatus. But I had to come and address the topic of the day, the times that we're in. Because there's still many white folks out there that don't understand why many black men, women, and children, and now seemingly the whole world, is so angry, and why we're destroying and burning what's not ours. Okay, listen. Stop what you're doing. Take a few minutes and allow my extremely small amount of knowledge on why to enlighten your perspective and hopefully answer your questions. But before we do that, L.U.M.I.L.L.E is where this channel's purpose is to love, uplift, motivate, inspire, learn, laugh, encourage, and enlighten. Worldwide, regardless of color, creed, culture, gender, age, or status. L.U.M.I.L.L.E, one love. Now, there are several areas that I'll touch on, leading you on a trip, if you will, 150 years back to the present. The topics that I want to cover in this video are black codes, Jim Crow laws, the First and Second World Wars up to 1955, which many of you were born until now or shortly after, and some maybe even have been before that. And I'm talking to my white friends. I'd like to cover the 60s and 70s and the last 5 years, meaning from 2015 up to 2020, which would include Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Samuel Du Bois, Terrence Kusher, Philando Castile, just to name a few. Now, rather than going an extremely long history lesson, I'll just go back to the 1860s forward. Okay, just a little over 150 years back, so you get the gist of a taste of the last 400 years. Okay, so let's begin. And as a disclosure, as a disclaimer, this is not to offend anybody, but it is meant to enlighten all on just a small sample of just what black Americans have had to endure for the last 400 years. You can Google and you can research all that I'm sharing and all that I'm saying in this video. So please be warned in advance. This is truth for your enlightenment and growth. So please like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. And please leave a comment down below in the comment section. All right? Now, lynchings, a form of extrajudicial killings. They were a brutal form of killings that took place across the country, okay? Including the 3 states where George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery lived, okay? Lynchings not only included hanging black people from trees, but they often included torture. White mobs cut off black men's genitals, severed fingers and toes, and skinned victims who were often burned alive. Black women were no children. Black women and children were no exception. White mobs sometimes sliced open the wombs of pregnant women, killing the babies also. In the 18th century and throughout U.S. history, white people were deputized to kill black people. The father and son in Georgia, and we'll just use Georgia as an example, were acting like slave catchers. This reminiscence of violence that resulted in enslaved black people walking without papers, which were included in black codes, okay? You could be arrested and possibly hung if you were caught walking without papers. This is where we can relate to our Latino brothers and sisters where they fear immigration. We too went through that. But now going into black codes. What are black codes, you may ask? Well, let's talk about black codes for a minute. Black codes, sometimes known as black laws, were laws governing the conduct of African Americans, free blacks, okay? Best known for these laws passed in 1865 and 66 by the southern states to restrict black people's freedom and to compel them to work for low and almost no wages. And again, these were laws that were on the books for many years. I mean, for like 12 years, like until 1877. Well, then the Reconstruction Act passed that basically ended the black code laws in 1877, only to be reacted in the Jim Crow laws, which from the late 1800s until 1964 with the Civil Rights Act that passed. So even though the black codes ended with the Reconstruction Act, they picked up right in place with the Jim Crow laws in 1877, almost 100 years later till 1964. If we're all equal, why did we need a Civil Rights Act in the first place? Think about that. From black codes to Jim Crow, which instituted the segregation of the two groups, black and whites, in every area, from schools to restaurants to hospitals to libraries to hotels to bathrooms to drinking fountains, including transportation to walking on the side of the street. Or check this out, even talking to white people. Certain rights, such as legalized marriage and owning property and access to the courts, but they denied them access to serve on juries, to serve in state militias, to vote or to start businesses, or to even bring lawsuits against whites. So now we move into the 1900s, before the Great Depression of the late 1920s, right? Where it was bad for all Americans, right? I'll tell you a story about Mary Turner in 1918. She was a black woman who was 21 years old, and she was 8 months pregnant, who was lynched by a white mob in southern Georgia after she protested the lynching of her husband just the day before. Now, this is according to the NAACP. Between 1880 and 1968, in the state of Georgia, there were at least that was recorded or reported 637 lynches, according to the Tuskegee Institute study. Now, Mary's husband, whose name was Hayes Turner, he was accused of killing a plantation owner named Hampton Smith. So now a weak manhunt went on searching for Mary's husband, which resulted in a public lynching. And she denied her husband having any dealings to do with this killing, and she threatened to have the mob arrested. Well, the very next day they came after Mary after lynching her husband. The mob tied her by her ankles on a tree upside down, doused her with gasoline and motor oil to make sure she stayed on fire. Then they set her on fire, and while yet on fire and still alive, one of the mob slit her abdomen open with a knife, where her child fell to the ground, where it was crushed to death and stomped on the ground. And her body was riddled with hundreds of bullets after they investigated and found her body. In this period of the early 1900s, many black people lynched were never formally accused of any kind of crime. They were never charged. They were just lynched for simply addressing a white person in a way that the white person deemed inappropriate. Like the many Beckys in recent months, like the white woman that just recently called the police, I think her name was Aimee Cooper, called the police on a black man in New York who asked her to put her dog on a leash, which is actually the law of the park. Well, she was offended that a black man was speaking to her and asked her to abide by the law. So she threatened to lie to the police about the situation and then proceeded to do so. If it wasn't for the video, that black man would have been a victim of the racist mentality that still exists in 2020 because of covenant. And I'll say that again, because of covenant that was made many years over and over and over in the refusal to see, to feel, and to treat blacks as equals. There's a depth of hatred in the bone marrow of this country that accepts the killing of the black body. This country was built on the racial ideals of white supremacy. Now, 46 of the 50 founders that signed the Declaration of Independence, as well as 10 of the first 12 presidents, were slave owners. Isn't that something? The very founders that signed the Declaration of Independence, that states that all men are created equal, did not find black men as equal. Yet even slaves were only considered 3/5 human. 3/5 human. What is 3/5 human of a free person? I don't get it. What is 3/5 of a free person? Does that mean 2/5 of a person is still a slave, but we're 3/5 of a free person? Can you begin to understand now, white people, why we're so upset, to those that are watching this video? Okay, so moving on to Jim Crow and black codes, which were enacted to control black people's movement at night. And some all-white towns enacted these laws, which were called sundown laws, which meant that black people had to leave the town by sunset, which led to many black people being lynched because they were caught after sundown. So get it? The law was you had to leave the town before sundown, but if you were caught out after sundown, most black folks were lynched. So do you understand why we'd be so upset? Okay, so after the Depression of the late 1920s, it even got worse for black folks because now everyone is out of work, they hungry, and they broke. So, of course, this irritated and enraged white people even more in the late 1920s. So then when World War I broke out in the mid to late 30s, and then World War II happened in the early 40s, blacks were killed while in service. And then when they returned from service with expectations of freedoms and rights that were promised to blacks for service, even still segregated and denied their rights and their freedoms and were killed in their very uniforms that they came home in the streets. Even after 2 world wars, white people still killed and tortured black people without fear of retribution. Even up until 1968 at the last recorded hanging. Even after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Now, I was born in 1968. And at 52 in 2020, this mentality of injustice and white supremacy is still very prevalent in this country. Okay, now let's look at the last 5 years. From 2015, Freddie Gray, killed by police, choked out, no conviction. Sandra Bland, killed by police, in police custody, no conviction. Du Bois was killed, no conviction, by campus police, shot in the head. Philando Castile, shot in his head, in front of his girlfriend and his kid, no conviction. Terrence Crutcher, the man was standing on the outside of his truck in the street, shot by police, no conviction. And I could go on and on, even up until just recently with all the protests we're posting about, with, George Floyd being choked to death, to Breonna Taylor being shot 8 times in her house on a no warrant police, no knock warrant, but she was shot 8 times, no conviction. Ahmaud Arbery, who was hunted down like a dog. Though we only saw that little short 15-second clip, right? But the prosecutor had uncovered a whole lot more that was on that phone that showed where the guy who was doing the video, he actually hit Ahmaud Arbery with his car while he was running. And so when Ahmaud Arbery got up and started running back the other way with his car, that's when they turned around and started chasing him down. And that's what we saw on the news, where he was chased down and shot down in the street. And then it wasn't until almost 2 months later that this comes to light. And you wonder why we're still so angry, my white friends. Let me leave you with this. Let me leave you with an idea of how many police departments reported fatal shootings to the FBI in all 50 states from 2004 to 2014, which they were required to do. Only 28 states reported fatal shootings of deaths to the FBI. Just to name some that did not report fatal deaths and shootings were states like California, Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Jersey, Illinois, Indiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee. I mean, just to name a few. Come on, man, we can do better when we know better. And accepting truth to be better than we are right now. And just to add a little more to the understanding of my white friends. Put yourself in our place. For just the last 150 years that I went back, even though we could go back 400, how would you feel if laws were enacted against you to keep you down and to suppress you, where you could be killed just for talking to someone? How would you feel? So think about how we feel. And I would suggest to all my white friends, go back and look at the Jane Elliott experiment. Research it on YouTube. Look at the Jane Elliott experiment. Look at all that I've talked about in this video and just recently what has happened, and you wonder why we are so upset. Please understand. We so appreciate you standing with us and sticking by us, but we need you to understand our plight. So once you understand why we're so upset and angry, then in your support and standing with us, you can help us change laws. Because no matter how much you stand with us in solidarity, and no matter how much you come to the understanding of the knowledge of the truth of why we're so angry and upset, that will mean nothing unless you help us pass legislation that changes the laws on the books. That's the real truth of the matter. And though blacks have suffered so much at the hands of white people in this country, which is the truth, we still stand together, arm in arm in solidarity with our white supporters that want to see black injustices come to an end, and to include all injustices done by police all over the world. Won't you stand with us? Won't you stand for us? Listen, this is your boy Levon, and this is Levon Says. I pray you've been enlightened and grow from this content and share so we all can come together against racism in all forms. L.U.M.I.L.L.E, love, uplift, motivate, inspire, learn, laugh, encourage, and enlighten. One love. This is your boy Levon, and I'm out.